Hello, my name is Dr. Jim Doty, and I'm the host of the Into the Magic Shop podcast, where we explore the mysteries of the brain and the secrets of the heart. Well, hello, everyone. Scott Barry Kaufman is my guest today. Many of you know him, not only as a cognitive psychologist, but also a celebrated book author. And today we're just going to have a chat about a few of the things that intersect with my interests. He has a new book, or maybe it's not that new nowadays. When did it come out? September of 2022? Choose Growth?
Choose Growth. Yeah, that's right. Yes.
Yes. Is there another one that I've missed?
I didn't know I didn't know if you were going back to Transcend. I didn't know which book you were going to mention. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, actually, I love Transcend, but I love many of the things you've written about. Actually, one of the things that struck me was you mentioned tragic optimism, and maybe that's a place to start. I finished a new book, but one of the things I came across was this concept of dispositional optimism. And probably they overlap in some ways, but maybe you can describe that and the importance of that and how it gives you a different perspective.
Sure. I mean, that the idea of tragic optimism was coined by Viktor Frankl, who was the Holocaust survivor, humanistic existential psychotherapist, to talk about how we can create meaning even under the most dire of circumstances. There's nothing wrong with optimism, obviously. Martin Seligman has found that, it's correlated with all sorts of healthy things in life. But I think that toxic optimism is a thing. I think toxic positivity is a thing. And tragic optimism allows you to appreciate things in your life or even find meaning and grow even in the bad without denying the reality of the bad. To me, toxic positivity is just denying the reality of situations. When someone's suffering or someone is going through a terrible ordeal and someone says, "Oh, just put on a happy face," to me that's toxic positivity. Yeah.
Well, believe me, and it's when you're suffering, to get that from people, of course, is quite irritating. To say the least. And it's sort of been interesting to see how some people have embraced that, like, hunky-dory, the world's great today, and, you're dealing with your wife having cancer or a child who's ill or some tragic event, and somebody says this to you, and you frankly feel like beating them up. And that might be actually a good way of release.
You have a cheeky side to you. This is the first time I've met you.
Oh, well, it gets worse. Believe me. A little earlier before we started, just for those who are listening, we were talking about different people I've interviewed, and I brought up Hunter Biden, and I think for a minute you found it incredulous, but hopefully I explained the reasoning behind that.
Yeah, definitely.
So there's so many areas I'm interested in, but of course, why don't we start with Transcend? And maybe you can explain for some of the listeners who may not know, although I think most people do, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which of course is represented as a pyramid, but I don't think he ever actually did that.
He didn't do that. That's the spoiler alert. The hierarchy of needs is usually depicted as a pyramid in textbooks, and you have like the bottom you have safety, then you have belonging above that, and then self-esteem or esteem above that, and then above that of the triangle at the top is self-actualization. So four levels. But the thing is, Maslow never drew a pyramid, and he never thought of life like a video game, like where you reach a certain level of needs and then some voice from above is like, congrats, you've unlocked the next need, and then you can just move up, and you never have to worry about the one below it. in his writings, he was very careful. He was very nuanced, talking about how we can target multiple needs simultaneously, how life and human development is always constantly this 2-step forward, 1-step back dynamic. We have to just keep choosing growth and overcoming the fear response. But you don't just ever reach a stage where you never have to have any fear anymore of anything, So I think that it's really important to make that clear that he never drew a pyramid, never thought of it that way in such a linear way.
Yeah, it's and he even though spoke of transcendence, although most people I don't think appreciate that.
Most people don't know that. Most people, I think that I deeply appreciate that he did, but I don't. I was surprised because you're never taught that in introductory to psychology. When you hear about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, very rarely do they put transcendence there at the top. The professor. It's just self-actualization. But the past couple of years of his life, he very much got interested in transcendence and transcendent states of being, and I think that there's criticism that self-actualization was a very individualistic thing, and I think he really wanted to make it clear that self-actualization is really a bridge to transcendence, when done right. He said, and I thought it was quite beautiful, Maslow said that its function is to erase itself. You're not doing it all just for yourself. You're doing it so there's a great synergy between who you are and the world, so that there's no separation of self and world. What's good for you is good for the world. And he emphasized that a lot more in the last couple of years of his life. But I think a lot of it had to do with his own fear of mortality and his expectation that he would die soon because he had a heart attack a couple of years before. That the doctor said any minute he could kick the bucket. So I think he was really focused on transcendence.
Well, that's interesting, though. So would you say that that he was having cognitive dissonance on some level and was now facing the existential crisis of his own death, and therefore was focused in this area now?
Why? What do you think in terms of cognitive dissonance? What could it have been?
Well, I mean, on the one level, promoting self-actualization, but then sort of segueing into the fact that we live beyond, or there's this universal oneness, et cetera, et cetera.
I see. Maybe that's a really clever. I've never really analyzed his psyche to that level. I don't know. I think that he really started to appreciate the little things in his life. I think that he started to talk about, you see in his writings a really focus on finding the miraculous in the everyday, and having more awe and wonder for your life and experiences. And I think that this is a common thing that happens to a lot of people who are facing their mortality. And the question is, why do we wait to face our mortality before we experience transcendence? Why can't we make that choice today? Whoever we are, that we're going to infuse more transcendence in our lives. We sort of wait too long to overcome our ego. We wait too long to not worry about money so much. We wait too, et cetera, et cetera. We wait too long before we get to the things that really matter in life.
No, I think that's right. And in some way, it's a tragedy because, you see these people who have immense power in terms of whether it's wealth, position, et cetera, who never act to, if you will, support the greater good. And then suddenly at the end, they're scrambling to try to figure that out. And oftentimes either their power's dissipated or they're not in a position to do that, and then, of course, then they die, which is horribly unfortunate. On
a positive note,
what?
We're having nice weather today.
Well, maybe that was, is that tragic optimism? I don't know.
Maybe it's, something.
Yeah, exactly. what do you think people get confused about? Because, of course, it's sort of become sort of the jargon of everyone, this idea of Maslow's pyramid or hierarchy of needs. What do you think they miss in regard to self-actualization, or how he used the term versus what's commonly interpreted? And then I'd like to talk about those who are at the lowest level or have just left the lowest level and how that relates to happiness.
Yeah, okay, these are great questions. I think that the emphasis that Maslow had, which is what I have reflected in my revised hierarchy of needs, is the distinction between the deficiency realm or deficiency motivation and growth motivation. And by the way, I'm not talking about growth mindset. You know how everyone's like obsessed with growth mindset. No, I'm talking about growth motivation is something a little bit different. So, when you're motivated by your deficiencies, everything to you looks like utility value for relieving the hole in your heart, right? So, or whatever the deficiency is. So if you're chronically hungry, everywhere you go, there's like opportunity for food, if you're lonely, everyone is, you're motivated by your deprivation of loneliness. So you're basically like, please be my friend, if you feel low self-esteem, you demand respect everywhere you go. It's like, I demand respect. It's like, I don't even know you. Why do I need to respect you? But anyway.
Barry, I demand respect, damn it.
Mr. Doty, it's Scott. Barry's my middle name.
Oh, no, okay. Well, I'm just doing that on purpose to irritate you.
I was going to say that was a good example of disrespect. That's why it was perfect. That's why it's perfect. No, yeah, but the growth motivation was a different, motivation than deprivation motivation. When you're motivated by growth, you look at people and the world on its own terms. You see the beauty, not for what it does for you. Carl Rogers says when you look at a beautiful sunset and you don't say, oh, if only the hue was a little bit different and you moved the left corner up a little bit to the right, you're not trying to change a beautiful sunset, but we try to change people.
Yep. Well, that's funny because I do know a couple people who would say something like that, right? This would be a great sunset. I remember when I was in Hawaii and it was much better
really?
than that.
Well,
you go,
those people suck.
It's interesting. I had Dacher Keltner on a few weeks ago.
I loved him. Yes.
Yeah. No, he's wonderful. But we talked about wonder, joy, awe, and it was a very nice conversation. And that's, I think, what people forget. Which is they don't appreciate their own agency in terms of making themselves happy.
And that's a great point. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's interesting, and this is why I wanted to ask you about the lower level. If we look at people from third world countries who, they may be poor, but they have community, they have enough to eat, they have shelter. Many of those people are the happiest people I've ever met. And it's sort of interesting because, and I think it's a tragedy where, we have people coming from third world countries here under the false narrative that conspicuous consumption will make you happy.
I know. Conspicuous consumption just makes people want more conspicuous consumption. You open up the trap of never-ending greed.
Well, yeah, and the problem is it somehow, and it's always interested me how it creates a scarcity mentality. The more you have, the more you want, and it seems paradoxical.
Yeah, it is. It is paradoxical, and it's a great point. I had the minimalists on my podcast recently. I'm thinking of them right now when you say that. Have you come across these guys?
Yes, I've heard of them. I mean, they live at the bare minimum, although that can get extreme too, right?
Yeah. Well, yeah, I don't think they take it to the extreme level, but they really try to make sure that they have one of everything, not five of everything.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, this is actually, that's an interesting point, because I'm sure you appreciate, I probably have 5 of everything, unfortunately, I hate to admit. But if I really examine it, I wear about 5 or 10%, right? And everything else sits there, but you wear the same thing over and over.
That's what they say.
So are you a minimalist?
Oh, I'm not a minimalist. No, I'm more like you. No, I've got more. When it comes to certain things, I'm not a minimalist. Like furniture, chairs. They know, got too much. Yeah.
Is that an Ames chair behind you there?
It is. Ask me how many times I sit in it. Ask me how many times I actually sit in it.
How many times?
Yeah, maybe I sat in it a couple times, so 2 times.
Well, it's. Have you ever heard of this Japanese phrase about buying books and not reading them?
No, what's the phrase?
Oh, well, it's a word. Now you had to add. It's like Tutsukido or something like that, and it's an interesting phenomenon of how people buy books, but they don't read them all, and it's funny because there was another person who responded that said he was angry or upset because somebody asked him, well, have you read all of your books? And he said, no, they're there to remind me to read, and I'm happy to have tons of books I haven't read. And the person said, well, that's such a waste. And he was saying, no, I mean, I love to be surrounded by books and thoughts. And when a topic strikes me, it's great to be able to walk over and find a book about that topic. I see you have a lot of books in the background. So I guess the question is, have you read them all?
Yeah, I have. I've read these books. This is my collection. Books to me are very sacred. I get like sentimentally attached to books in a way I don't with humans, which is very weird. Very weird.
Yes, Scott, that is very weird.
Yeah, I understand that. I'm in therapy.
I think we're all in therapy.
Everyone could use it. Everyone could use it to, I mean, meet the person who says they have no issues, and you've met someone with a lot of issues.
Well, this is like the statement that if anyone tells you they're enlightened, you should turn and run as fast as you can.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
In the other direction, because
especially if they say I'm enlightened and you're not, and for X amount of dollars, I can teach you how to be enlightened. Yeah.
Well, that's a whole nother narrative. It is sort of interesting, though, how there's a subset of people who turn even the good stuff into an opportunity for profit.
Oh yeah,
yeah, and it's sort of, I don't know, and maybe you have some insights into.
I do.
Well, tell me.
Because I study the dark triad. I actually invented.
You have the light triad, though,
yes,
right?
I was just gonna say. I invented that with my my amazing colleagues, David Yaden and Elizabeth Hyde. We created the light triad. But before I created the light triad, I had studied the dark triad for about 10 years. So I first came to dark triad and studying, Machiavellianism, people who just are constantly scheming, constantly manipulative, narcissism and psychopathy. These things tend to go together. But it's fascinating to me because a lot of these people go under the radar. I'll see on Instagram, I'll see people who to me appear so dark triad, and they're talking about love and I don't know, whatever. But they have millions of fans. You know what I mean? And I'm like, what are those fans seeing in this person? Do you ever see someone? You're like, no, what the hell?
I could probably name 3 or 4. No, it's
doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, but again, this is the aspect of human behavior that it's hard to process how people are taken in and manipulated. And I think our presidential candidate Trump is like this. You sit there and it is beyond what you can fathom that so many people could be drawn into this person who is the antithesis of the light triad, if you will, right?
Very antithesis. Yeah. Yeah.
So what do you think that says about human beings now? And it's interesting because I think there's a spectrum, right? There's a spectrum of people who, let's say, quote unquote, find a guru. And then, they follow that person and they do all these good things based on what the guru asks them to do. And then it extends all the way to Trumpism, if you will, where these people just completely blindly do oftentimes the most heinous things or make statements of hate and towards others. And it just seems so strange. And is it just a spectrum? Or I think, of course, all of us are aware of the Holocaust and the propagandism and how that got people into it. Is this just a failing of human nature?
What do you think?
No, I'm not going to let you turn this back to me. You're on my podcast.
It's a very deep question. With the idea of failing of human nature I just feel like it's a really, like, for someone who also studied evolutionary psychology, I don't like to call, there could be things that are adaptations that we don't like, things that have evolved. Sometimes manipulation, that's a good trait. You can use that towards good ends. I assume Martin Luther King was a little bit Machiavellian, or else he wouldn't have gotten any of his goals, accomplished. So I think maybe some of these things, it's the context. How are they applied, and how many and how is it hurting others?
Yeah, no, I don't have any particular insights. As you point out, I think the nature of evolution isn't one striving for good necessarily.
That's right.
It's to strive to survive in your particular environment, and also it's not. It doesn't cut off bad things, right? It, you may get some sort of attribute, but it's not as if there's some overseer who says, now a million years later, that's not good, so we're going to take it out of there. You're an amalgamation of all of these things with those things that may allow you to survive suppressing others, but it doesn't necessarily mean the others are gone per se. At least that's my limited view from that of a neurosurgeon. So
cool. I got to interview you someday, but anyway. Go on.
Well, then you'll have to put up with my cynicism, your listener. So,
well, cynicism is an indicator of dark triad.
There you have it. You found me out. Well, it's funny. I had a therapist one time, shockingly, and he said, you have narcissistic traits, but the only things that saves you is you have a good heart. So maybe,
Oh, so you're a lovable narcissist. I'm trying to come up with a scale of that.
Yes. So I'm a lovable narcissist, I should say. Although I'm not an extreme narcissist. But as you said, you look at who did you give Martin Luther King. Was he a narcissist?
I think there's healthy narcissism. I think that's just the answer to that puzzle. Is there and Kohut talked about that. People, some of the original psychoanalytic thinkers of narcissism, I think, had some of the greatest insights about narcissism, and we don't bring it into modern day science, but I think that's unfortunate. Kohut, I believe, talked about the healthy narcissism, or when it's not paired with psychopathy, it can be a great tool for reaching your goals in life. And having too much self-belief in yourself, it's not always a bad thing. Sometimes, I'd like a little more self-belief in certain situations, even if it's not like based in reality. I want to if I'm talking to someone, like a cute woman that I'm and I'm nervous, right, or whatever, I'd like in those moments to have just a little more pep in my step or whatever. Does that make sense?
No. I think that's that's true. There's no question that whether you want to call it self-confidence or narcissism,
irrational self-belief.
yeah. No, It's positive narcissism. I want you to study that now. Positive narcissism.
Yeah, I think it needs to be studied more, honestly. Yeah.
Yeah.
The dark triad is when all these three things coalesce, and that really gets dark. I mean, they're actually the fourth. They added the fourth now. Did you catch the headline on that one?
No.
Sadism. Every day, he calls it everyday sadism. The guy who coined that, the researcher who actually originally coined the dark triad, he's now added everyday sadism into that. So if you got all four, so yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like, so if you got all four, don't get it twisted. If you got all four of those things in high thing, there ain't nothing healthy about that.
No,
that ain't healthy.
No.
But I guess what I was just saying is, like, if you have some narcissistic traits that you score low in those others, but you could still score high in compassion. Maybe I'm describing you, but profile of you. Maybe that's what you're trying to say. But I think that it's the combinations of traits that matter. I don't like to take one slice of a human and reduce them to one thing. I like to look at a holistic sort of whole person analysis of traits.
Yeah, well, in some ways, that was what I was explaining about Hunter Biden, because I did get some flack for that.
Really?
Well, you get flack for everything. Right? I mean, if you go and save someone's life, let's say you pull them out of the ocean or something, then somebody comes up and go, they owe me money on a bill. They should have died.
No.
They go, but
especially political.
Yeah, well,
especially people who are tied to politics. Forget it. You can't. I had Charles Koch on my podcast. I got flack for that. Just anyone who's that activates political something.
Well, it's funny. Have you ever heard of something called the Bohemian Club?
Is that appropriate to talk about here?
Probably not.
No, I'm joking. I'm thinking about a different Bohemian Club, but no, tell me about this one.
No, this is the one that was founded in San Francisco by a group of people interested in arts, theater, music. It was journalists, and then they involved some fairly wealthy people in San Francisco, and then it evolved into a private men's club. But there's been a lot written about it, because they say that the most powerful and wealthy people in America go to this, and all these decisions are made, and it is sort of interesting how you have that aspect of gatherings like that. But
why don't I ever get invited to anything like that? Well,
Scott, maybe you should look in the mirror and have some insights. I mentioned it because I was invited and gave a talk there a number of years ago on compassion, which actually generated some interest and, I think gained some insights. But it's an interesting place. Yeah.
No, that's very cool. Have you heard of the Illuminati?
Well, of course. I'm a member, aren't you?
Well, if you're a member, you're not allowed to.
What is it? It's Fight Club. If you're a member of Fight Club, you can't talk about Fight Club. Is that it?
I get the same thing with Illuminati, so I'm going to shut up right now. Yes.
Yeah. Well. But see, this is a false flag, right? So we're talking about it and acting like we're sort of part of it, but nobody really knows the truth, right?
No.
And by the fact that we're doing that, people don't believe that we're possibly in it.
BKND. I like it. It's because they couldn't fit it horizontally on the mug.
It's the name of a friend of mine.
Brooklyn. Wait, hold it up again.
Wait.
Brooklyn okay, cool. I like it.
So, but if you look at it the other direction from bottom to up, you see it says DIE. You see, so we don't want to focus on that though.
Diversity, inclusion, equity.
Yeah, there you have it. Not die, right?
No, the thing I immediately thought of was diversity, inclusion, equity. That's so popular right now. Yeah.
Oh well, and I would like to believe rightly so. And actually, maybe that's an interesting direction to go. Why do you think that there is so much tension regarding this concept of diversity, inclusion, equity?
Oh, wow. This interview has opened up lots of fascinating threads. I think that it gets political. Gets political. There's it starts to get out of my wheelhouse of psychology, but I would say that a lot of people, if you start focusing on particular groups, then there are other groups that say, well, what about us? Why aren't we included? We should be included in that too. And you start to get into the victimhood Olympics, who is like suffering more. And that's just not the route for society, in my view, to play to even opt into that game. We should be listening to each other's pain, not begin to think that not think that our suffering is the only suffering in the world. There needs to be a lot more crosstalk, and I'm unfortunately not seeing a lot of that in America right now, and it really upsets me.
No, I agree with you, and it's sort of I think one of the challenges, and whether this is by the wealthy class or people who sort of are disparaging to other groups, is this one. When somebody has privilege and you take that privilege away, or there's a threat of it, those people feel oppressed, right? I think it's really hard to sit with your own privilege, because then you have to sort of look at yourself and on some level be critical, which, of course, I think all of us should do.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many different ways that you can be privileged, and I think that people think it means something different than what it really means. It just means what do you have, what characteristic that gives you a leg up, inherently, versus others. But like a lot of people are focusing on white privilege, but there's all sorts of things. There's like my ability to walk, my ability to see, when you really get down to it, every single human on this planet is a mix of privileges and disadvantages, right? And so I just think zooming out on this is a way forward for compassion, not shaming others. I actually don't like it when it gets to the sort of like shaming route, as opposed to just an awareness route. Those are two different routes in my view.
So how do you get to the more healthy perspective, in your opinion?
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about that. I'm actually working on a new book that covers a lot of these kinds of topics. So it's very fresh in my mind, and I'm still working on it. I haven't solved all of society's problems yet. But a lot of it comes down to this very replicable social psychology finding, which you see over and over again, which is that I've been interested in collective victimhood. And actually I have behind me somewhere the handbook of collective victimhood. I kid you not, there's a 1,000-page academic handbook that I've been going through on this to look at the research. But I'm just going to summarize like 1,000 pages in a second and say that
that's pretty good if you're able to do that.
Well, I think there is a really unbelievably high replicable finding in that research literature, which shows that groups that, like you look at the Israeli-Palestine conflict, they don't make progress at all unless you start, both sides need to take the step of acknowledging the suffering of the other side. It sounds so simple, and yet it's so hard, because people are not willing to give an inch. They think that if they acknowledge the suffering of the other side even a little bit, that they've lost the war. And that's the only way we're going to progress as a society, is if we can open our hearts just even a little bit.
No, I think that's exactly right. I've spent a fair amount of time in Belfast, and with many of the people from different sides of the conflict. And while certainly what they've done is admirable, and it still needs more work, it's still incredible. But I think part of the problem in many of these instances is unlike, let's say, in America, there's this amalgamation of all these different cultures, people, ethnicities. And in these other areas, oftentimes, you have people who live there for generation after generation after generation who have these long memories. And because they're still in the same place, the conflicts are constant. And I think that's one of the challenges is how do you get out of that? Because, once you're not in the middle of it all the time and you're hearing your parents, your grandparents, your great-grandparents, telling you about horrific stories of the other, until those are able to fade into memory or you realize that you need to get past that, I think it's really hard to do.
Yeah, I mean, it's easier for psychologists just at a distance. Why can't they all just get along? But yeah, no, I mean, it's true.
Who was that? That was King. Remember the guy during the Watts riots? Why can't we all just get along?
I remember that. Yeah,
Yes.
I do remember that. Yeah. That was funny.
But yes, no, I think that's an interesting situation, and it's sad. But like I said, having spent time with both groups in Northern Ireland, it's really been an eye-opener. And I mean, literally, I was with a fellow who had assassinated 3 different people. He was on the Protestant side. And yeah, I mean, you just hear these horrible tragedies, but you also see these incredible situations where people have opened their hearts, have forgiven, and then are able to go forward. But, it's hard to do.
It's hard to do, but a lot of it takes a mindset shift. I think it's detrimental to personal growth to reduce your whole identity to a victimhood identity. Like if the whole thing is just that is your identity, you don't see the possibilities for growth, but you also don't see the possibilities for connection with others who may be very different from you. And I think that's a shame. And I don't even mean this in a political way, because I think that term, victimhood identity or victimhood sort of mentality has been co-opted for political reasons, but I think we all show it at times, and it inhibits our growth.
Well, speaking of growth, maybe we can switch over to your fairly new book.
Choose Growth.
Yes, yeah. So tell me about what motivated you to write that, and sort of the nature of trauma, if you will, that everyone carries with them. But how that affects people.
Yeah, I don't know if everyone has had a trauma in their life, but
everybody I know has, even though they may lie and say they don't, right?
A lot of people for sure. But I think that I just want to make a cultural statement real quick. I think the term trauma has become something very, very different than what the clinical term for it is. Now everyone's traumatized by everything. I mean, there's now people talking about mini traumas, micro traumas,
microaggressions.
Yeah. But I heard the phrase micro trauma, and it's just like, I don't know, the word trauma starts to lose its meaning. The way I see it is, in a lot of ways, trauma is in the eye of the beholder. You can have the traumatizing, the potentially traumatizing event, but it doesn't mean that the person has to be there's a requirement that they're traumatized by it, and then trauma is sort of the narrative or the sort of cognitive representation you have about the events. And in a lot of ways, a real core feature of trauma is that you have experienced an event that has given you a psychologically seismic shift in your thinking and worldview about things. And that's the language that comes from the post-traumatic growth literature, a psychologically seismic event. That has caused your whole worldview has changed. Like what you thought was up now all of a sudden seems down, and you've really kind of lost your footing of what's real, what can you trust, and that's a very psychologically damaging state of mind for sure. We need to have compassion for that, and there are a lot of people who go through these situations and really need to rebuild. But it's like an earthquake. You don't just, when an earthquake happens, you don't just say, oh well, the ground sucks now, like the houses are gone, life's over. What you do is you rebuild. And unfortunately, I see a lot of people stuck in this sort of, I'm gonna just suffer from my trauma and talk about it all day long on Instagram and see how many likes I can get, by talking about my trauma, as opposed to I'm gonna actually build something new and try to move my life forward. I think people are capable of a lot more resiliency than they give themselves credit for.
Well, I think that's a good point. I think there are a couple aspects of that. One is people don't have the insight or self-awareness that the drivers of so much of their behavior is the trauma itself. And so they think by talking about it more and more and perhaps getting sympathy, in some ways it's like a dependency or even a codependency, right? And in fact, many of these people find partners who sit there and go, oh, so-and-so is suffering, because of this, and I have to be here to help them. And the other aspect, I think, and this is not to minimize the nature of trauma for some people, but, an event doesn't have any valence, right? It's neither good nor bad. It's just an event. And so what a lot of people get lost in is this emotional response that then gets embedded. And every time they experience something that is even distantly related, they get that same feeling back. And then that creates a whole psychological and physiologic response. And obviously that seems very, very real. But at the end of the day, I think people forget that they have self-agency.
Yeah, that's a really important point. And there is there is an I call it the empowerment mindset. It's just a very different mindset than a passivity mindset. I think a lot of people face learned helplessness and don't know they need to learn hopefulness. It's something that needs to be learned as well, learn hopefulness. My colleague Dan Thomasula wrote a great book called Learned Hopefulness. It takes work. I think there are also a lot of legit lazy people. And it's like, oh, you always have to show compassion 24/7 for someone. But I think sometimes some people need to realize that they're like, oh, well, I'm not getting, I haven't changed overnight. So therefore forget it. I've given up. What people need to know is that the process of overcoming trauma and growing, it does take work. It does take effort. You have to, be determined to change, to be determined to be a better person. I mean, I think it's hard for almost anyone to work at improving their lives and overcoming challenges in their life. But I think that there is so many examples of what is possible and what's on the other side for you if you're willing to put in the work. But I think there are some people that really like the attention they get from posting about their traumas
or their suffering. Well, I think that's true, and I think unfortunately you're correct. I mean, there are many people who want to read a book and suddenly say, "Oh, this has solved every personal problem I have," and certainly books can be helpful for that. But at the end of the day, you have to do the work, and it's not an hour's worth of work or a week's worth of work. Sometimes it's years of work. And and I think that for many people seems overwhelming to think about that. But again, it gets back to anything. If you think of the totality of an event, let's say climbing Mount Everest, you go, "Oh my God, I could never do that." But if you sit there and say, "Okay, well, I'm going to first learn how to hike for 10 miles, and then I'm going to go the next step," and you break it down into these little pieces. Right.
You'll never climb Mount Everest if on day one there's some bad weather and you're like, oh my gosh, there's some bad weather. I give up.
Yeah, no, exactly. In fact, actually, there's a podcast I just did with a woman by the name of Sylvia Vasquez. Something, I forgot the last name, so she's going to kill me when she listens to this.
I think I know who you're talking about.
Yeah, but she's a Peruvian woman and who had been sexually abused as a child, and actually had an ayahuasca experience where her child self took her hand and pointed to the mountains and said something along the lines of, you must climb to heal yourself. And believe it or not, and this woman's probably 30 5'4", she's climbed the 7 summits.
Hmm.
And can
Wow,
you
that's
imagine?
incredible. I actually would love to interview her for my book.
Sure.
Yeah.
And in fact, I
Wow.
used her as an example in my book. The name of her book is In the Shadow of the Mountain.
Okay.
And it's really quite powerful. And the other thing that's interesting, actually, about it, let me see if I can just find her name here real quick.
Yeah. We can re-edit that so it doesn't sound like you forgot it.
Yeah. Well, let me find it.
We can do a re-edit. You could say,
Yes.
oh, and Vasquez.
Yeah. Let's see. It's Shadow of the Mountain.
No, I've been there. I was a podcaster. A
Yes.
memoir
Yes. Yes, A Memoir of Courage. Yes.
Lily Vasquez Lovato. You were
Yes.
almost all the way there. Yeah.
I know. I knew it started with an L, and I just couldn't remember that. But you see, we'll leave this in to show my vulnerability, Scott. And my kindness and sensitivity.
It shows your vulnerability, and it also shows me looking out for you. I wanted to.
Yeah. So this
help
is like
you.
a compassion team.
Yes. I wanted to help you. Yeah.
But she's an extraordinary human being, and actually, she had a long
Amazing.
history of alcoholism, because she would try to hide the pain that she was going through. And then what she would do is she would quit drinking for a period of time so she could do her trek. Then she would come back from climbing the mountain, and then would be in this alcoholic stupor for days to weeks at a time. And in fact, I'm in many ways privileged to know her. She actually read my book, Into the Magic Shop, and took a course that we give on compassion and self-compassion, and that was the catalyst for her to stop drinking. So,
wow.
Yeah.
I'm literally saving this right now because I'd love to talk to her. I love these kinds of stories. I'm collecting these kinds of stories right now. For this project I'm working on. Yeah.
Yeah. No. So I think she's just an amazing human being. Where's I going to go with you now? I've lost track because we got so into our own suffering and how actually ultimately nice we are. But in terms of the trauma, though, I know you have a workbook in there. So what do you think are the insights, briefly, that somebody can use to sort of deal with their own trauma?
Well, the book is real. It's the word traumas. That's a heavy. Let's get off the trauma train for a second.
Okay, we'll call it the growth.
Well, the life's difficulties. Like how can we cope with life's challenges? Not every life challenge is a trauma, and I want to be clear about that. And trauma is a very clinical word, but I really do think this book can help people to choose growth. I mean, that's the title of the book, is True Growth. First of all, it's just once you've committed to that path. I think that it requires a certain way of being in the world of cultivating high quality connections. For instance, we have all of these sort of things like don't be afraid to ask for help from people. There are a lot of people who suffer and don't realize there are a lot of people that would be happy to come in and help you. You're not a burden to them, to ask for help. And I think that's a big one.
No, I think that's very critical, because so many people, once they get in that mindset, think, I'm a burden to everyone around me. And I think you're right, because frankly, helping people makes people feel better.
Yeah. So it's a win-win.
Yeah.
For everyone. And we go down the line of all of these needs in my revised hierarchy of needs. So I have who's in your boat, like where do you feel stable, secure in your life? What do you need to do to feel safer in your life? And self-esteem, what are projects and things you can get involved in that give you an authentic sense of mastery, not a fake narcissistic sort of sense of like unearned, pride, but authentic pride. The psychologist distinguishing hubristic pride and authentic pride. I always found that a cool distinction. And then we talk about the higher needs like exploration and creativity. That's a topic I've studied in my career for many years, is how can people use the creative expression to help them heal from I guess you could say traumas, heal from anything. Like a lot of creative people put their suffering into their art, and whatever the art is, it can
No, I think
insert
that's
there. Yeah.
very true. Is in fact, there's some very interesting insights there, because whether it's painting or one of the things I find interesting, people who've suffered greatly, many of them become comedians.
I've noticed that too. Yeah, I've often thought if psychology doesn't work out, I would probably try my hand at stand-up comedy.
It's funny you say that, because I have a good friend who went into that, and she was convincing me I should go do stand-up, and I thought it would be actually fun, and I actually spent a little bit of time writing jokes. But I'm not quite there yet. Let me ask you about
You're funny.
a germane topic. Do you know Rick Doblin?
Yeah. I see he's been on your podcast recently.
Yeah. So we were talking about the nature of psychedelics, and as you know, he's been both at the forefront of the therapeutic use, but also legalization. But in terms of trauma, or whatever terminology you want to use at the moment, do you feel psychedelics have a place?
Oh yeah, for sure. It's funny because my I was to say my homeboy Abraham Maslow, who I have such affection for, but he was very critical of the use of psychedelics. He wrote a lot of criticisms about this. He was friends with Tim Leary, but he would tease Tim Leary, and he'd be like, "What, do you want to take an elevator to the top of Mount Everest? Or do you want to walk there?" But one day, him and Tim Leary were walking around the campus and got lost, and he said to Maslow, "Do you want to get a cab or you want to walk home?" And he's like, "No, I'll get a cab." So
Perfect.
there's a famous story like that of them then kind of ribbing each other about that. But anyway, long story short, I think that Maslow is probably wrong about that, because I think we're seeing right now all the positive benefits when you integrate. And I think it's an integrative process where you take psychedelics, but you bring those insights into your everyday life, and it can forever change our consciousness, give us a much greater sense of unity, and an ego disillusion is I think a great thing. And so I'm very pro the responsible use of these things.
Yeah, I think that's really the key phrase, is responsible use. I think that, this is beyond sort of the recreational use, which maybe can be therapeutic for some people, but the idea of this concept of integration and then sharing the experience and having maybe a therapist or someone with insights help you process these things. I think it can be very, very powerful and life-changing for so many people.
Yeah, and as we've seen, there's enough data now showing the transformative effects. But, not everything is for everyone. I don't think mindfulness meditation is for everyone. That's a controversial thing to say among some. If you go to some of these mindfulness conferences and you say that, you're in trouble.
Well, I say it because I
Okay.
will say on some level mindfulness is bullshit for a subset of people, or at least the way in which it is described. And just like many, if you want to call them religious practices, if you don't do mindfulness their way, you're an apostate, right? And this is one of the things that I think is tragic, because, you look at somebody like Thich Nhat Hanh or others who talk about walking meditation, or the fact of the matter is simply sitting in silence is a meditation practice. And people forget that because, unfortunately, there's a subset of people who get lost in this idea that you have to sit a certain way, you have to do this exact breathing exercise, and the very nature of that creates anxiety, which prevents them from getting the therapeutic effect. And the other side of that same coin is many people who feel that they are the expert are very condemning of people, versus having a gentleness and a understanding that people need to be held. You need to have an open heart. They need to be accepted. There needs to be non-judgment. You need to approach them with kindness and compassion. And when you do that, frankly, it doesn't matter what the practice is. Right?
Yeah.
It's
Great point.
So, yeah,
it's a great point. Yeah, and there, and everything you're saying is this is important nuance. We need to get the message out there to the general public. There's a really cool paper by David Vago,
sure.
Mind the Hype. And he's a mindfulness meditation researcher. It's just, I love to see, meditation scientists who are critical of their own field. To me, that's a beautiful thing. We should all be critical of our own fields,
Well, this is the problem, because there are some scientists who have swallowed the Kool-Aid. And of course, as you know, you can bend the data to fulfill what you expect to be the result.
Why would I know that? Why would I know that?
I'm trying to give you a little insight into yourself, Scott.
I don't bend no data. Speak for your damn self.
Exactly. But so I think that's very true. There's actually a book called Mindfulness. Have you seen that by Ron Purser?
I have. Yes. Yeah. I haven't read it. Did you read it?
No.
Neither of us read it, but we brought it up. Okay.
Well, I think, if you look at the summary, I think you can get a pretty good idea. And I've heard some of
what we're talking about. Yeah.
Yes, and he's been on podcasts and things. So, but all my knowledge is from podcasts, Scott. I want you to know
that. That's funny. Yeah, no, there's a lot of mindfulness, but a lot of it just betrays the fundamental original Buddhic principle. What was the point of it? It wasn't for your own self-indulgence. It was to have greater insight into the mind and have and reduce suffering on the planet. Somehow we missed the memo there in the West.
Yes, unfortunately. It's funny. I'll tell you a very quick story. Because I float in these circles and know a lot of spiritual and religious leaders, I have people who periodically will come to me and ask me to be their guru, which I find laughable, since, I view myself as, trying to understand these things myself. But this socialite woman, I was in Dharamsala with the Dalai Lama, and here this woman's in the audience. And it was interesting to watch her, because it was evident she was quite affluent, but Richard Gere was there, and over the period, she started moving towards Richard Gere to the point where she was sitting next to him. And I had a brief conversation with her. And a few weeks later, I was in Los Angeles with Eckhart Tolle, and the same woman was there. And then I was at, what was it? Oh, I was at an event with Amma, the hugging saint. I don't know if you've heard of her, but
yes,
she's a fascinating person and a good friend. But anyway, I was on stage with Amma, and this woman, I looked down and she's in the audience again. So I'm holding an event, and she comes to my event, and there's a reception afterwards, and she's there, and she comes up to me and she says, I want you to be my guru. I've seen you with the Dalai Lama and Eckhart Tolle and Amma, and clearly you have some special X, Y, or Z, whatever it was. And so I said, oh, okay, so you're serious about this? She said, oh, absolutely. I'll do anything. I said, okay. Well, you're willing to do anything? Oh, absolutely. So I said, okay, I'm going to give you a list of 100 books. And I want you to read for 4 hours a day. I want you to meditate for 2 hours. And then I want you to write in a journal about what you learned. And she goes, oh my God, that's 8 hours a day. And I said, well, nothing is easy, as we were talking about. She goes, but that's 8 hours a day. And I said, yes. And she goes, well, what will I learn from all of this? I said, well, if you've been really diligent, what you'll learn is that you don't need me at all. So there you go. That.
Wow. Well, that's not narcissism. That's humility, doctor. Maybe you're not an actual narcissist.
Damn it, Scott! You found out about me. I was posing as a narcissist.
I feel like a profound narcissist would have loved to be the guru, and just tell someone all their brilliant things of how to live their lives. But everything you said is right. That's the right way. Ultimately the person needs to learn for themselves. I just created a new form of coaching I call self-actualization coaching, where I try to bring a lot of the science into because there's a lot of the coaching field is just so it's I don't know the word, I can't use in polite company what it is, but the Wild West out there, and
Absolutely.
People take one seminar, a 2-hour seminar, now they're a coach, but
well, and they're in their early 20s.
Yeah, well, that's not necessarily a bad thing. So there was
well, learning to be a coach when you're in your 20s and coaching people in their 40s and 50s is
yeah. No, I totally hear you. But to me, coaching is all about helping the client get these insights. It's not about being the guru relationship. You can be a coach. You can be encouraging. You can help them think of new ways of thinking about themselves they never thought about themselves. But ultimately, they have to have those insights, right?
Well, yeah. I mean, I think your job is to understand enough about an individual psyche to then create a plan that works for them and supports them and encourages them and motivates them then to do the work. And I think, if you can do that, because it's not like, clapping your hands and saying, hey, we're all together, let's be good, and we're going to do this or that, and you're going to be just fine. And frankly, I think that journey is a painful one oftentimes.
Yeah. You got the right idea.
Well, listen, it's been a joy being with you. Do you have any last words you would like to say to our audience or to me, other than I'm not a narcissist, which I appreciate, but...
Well, I mean, there's a reason why you got into studying compassion. You obviously think it's a very important topic, and you think there needs to be more compassion in the world. So that's a very pro-social thing. So, well, first of all, let me say in response to what you just said, I hope these aren't my last words. Second of all,
not.
I really hope these aren't my last words. Second of all, I do hope we could chat again sometime. Please stay in touch. I'm a great admirer of your research and work, and I think that our worlds are a lot closer than we probably realize in terms of research and kind of how we want to improve the world. So it was a real delight chatting with you today.
No, I appreciate that. And, obviously I think we have a lot of in common friends, Sam Harris, David Eagleman, and all sorts of other folks out there. So,
Emma Seppala?
Oh, she's a dear friend. I love Emma. She worked for me, or we worked together for many years, and she has a lot of insights and just the nicest person around. So I like her a great deal.
Yeah. Great. Well, thanks again for having me on your show. It was a real honor.
Well, mine as well. And maybe we can do a part 2 and go in some other direction. So I appreciate it. Again, thank you for being with us today. The Into the Magic Shop podcast can be found where you find your most popular podcasts, or you can find us at intothemagicshop.com.